Joyce. I'll do everything I can to keep the time. I'm sure people are starting to get a little bit twitchy in their seats because lunch is approaching rapidly. Just to give a little bit of context, I'm going to talk about alcohol as a coping mechanism for stress in homelessness services. I manage a 49-bed homeless accommodation service for men with complex multiple needs in Chestney Street. So I'm just going to give a little bit of context around that. In terms of my background, I've worked in the health and social care field for the last 18 years, predominantly in addictions, homelessness, offending as well. So a lot of it with people who are at the furthest end of being socially excluded and are quite typically experiencing more of the causes than the general population. The organisation I work for, Changing Lives, is a national charity. We deliver a whole range of services, which includes homelessness services, housing generally, as in social housing. We deliver offending services, addiction and recovery services, and specific services tailored to needs. So we do a lot of work around domestic abuse, children, families, and women's services as well. And as I said, what I want to really cover is the impact that people's life circumstances have on how they feel, and then how alcohol becomes a part of managing how they feel. And just talk a little bit about some of the work that we're doing at the Fells to try and improve the situation and make things better for people in general. So the Fells, I don't know, is anybody familiar with the service? I see a few friendly faces in the room. As I said, it's a 49-bed supported accommodation service for adult males with complex and multiple needs. Everybody at the point of access is homeless, and we take referrals from County Durham. We cover the whole of the county. We have a tiered approach, so we have predominantly 3 tiers of accommodation. Tier 1 is a 17-bed unit, which is where every new entry to the service goes. That is the highest support end of the service. So in Tier 1, people are provided with 2 cooked meals a day. Tier 2 is kind of akin to student accommodation. We have 4 pods, 5 beds in each pod, and a shared kitchen and communal living area. So it's a bit more like semi-independent living. And then Tier 3, it's 8 beds, it's actually 4 bungalows with 2 residents sharing, and that's wholly independent. They have their own kitchen, lounge, it's just like a normal house. And it's kind of independent living with the safety net of the service behind them, so it's that kind of platform to move on to sustainable living in their own tenancy in the community. So in terms of homelessness, our kind of experiences have told with that quite often it's a byproduct of trauma, and quite often unresolved trauma. So people normally become homeless because of something that's happened to them either very recently. We have a number of residents at the moment who are with us who've been in full-time employment, who've had long-term relationships. Those relationships have broken down, they've lost their employment, they've lost their accommodation, they're homeless. Typically those people stay with them for a very short period of time. We also have a large proportion of the population who've had some significant life traumas, people who've been involved in some very serious incidents and accidents. We have people who've been in car injuries, have had quite difficult to manage physical illnesses. That's made it difficult for them to work, they've struggled on benefits, they've not been able to maintain accommodation, and they've moved on. We have people who've experienced sexual exploitation, people who've suffered sexual abuse, and also people who've been involved in other types of abuse outside of the family. So, quite often, in terms of the people that we work with, in terms of mental well-being, quite often we have some very poorly people. The organisation Homeless Link, which is a kind of an umbrella membership organisation for charities who work in the homelessness sector, carried out almost like a health check of the homeless population through their membership just to kind of get a feel for how things were. And actually, when you look at some of the results that came back from that, in total, I think there was around about 6,000 respondents. 80% of those reported experiencing poor mental health, and 45% of those actually had a diagnosed mental health illness. Now, when you compare that to, I think it's around about 25% for the general population, that's a significant step up. Just in a little bit more detail, and I apologise for the size of the text. 73% said they often felt stressed, and a further nearly 65% often felt anxious. This is an everyday occurrence, so again, going back to some of the earlier conversations about chronic stress, chronic anxiety, people who hold that with them all of the time. And again, if you look at diagnosed illnesses, 36% with depression, 7% with post-traumatic stress. So there's a real high prevalence of people generally just not feeling settled, feeling very anxious, very stressed, and that all being compounded by whatever their circumstances were that led them to be homeless. And then for some people, the anxiety of living in the fells, because when you first come into the fells, if you haven't been in that environment before, it's quite an unsettling environment to come into. And for some people, it's a difficult environment to be in. So again, that just further compounds those notions of not feeling settled and not feeling well. Just under 45% of the people who were involved in the study said that they did get support around their mental health through the homelessness services that they were accessing. But actually 28% said, well, yes, we get support, but we feel we need more. 17.5% said, actually, I want support and I'm not getting any. And then a small proportion, but significant, 10.2% said they didn't need any. I always question, is that because they didn't feel they needed any, or is it because actually they don't have the confidence to say they need the help and support around managing how they feel? So, I'm not asking for a show of hands, but how many people in the room, I wonder, use alcohol generally as a way of reducing stress? It's been a hard week. I can't wait to have that glass of wine when I get home. I'm going out with my mates tonight. I deserve it because I work hard. It's quite a common and accepted thing. I'm not judging people for that. I drink alcohol and there's times when I think, actually I'm quite looking forward to going out. But when we look at the homeless population, it's not used as part of a wider social context. It's not part of social engagement. It's used to deal with stress and anxiety. It's used to deal with things that they either can't access support to deal with, or have chosen not to access support to deal with. So, in terms of the study, 15%, just over 15% of the people who were surveyed drank every day. And of those people, just over 35% were drinking more than 10 units a day. Now, I'll not labour the discussion about units of alcohol. 2 to 3 units, 2 to 3 times a week is the recommended guidelines. I'd suggest, certainly within the fells, people who are drinking to manage or deal with a situation are drinking significantly beyond 10 units a day and drinking every day. So it's not uncommon for people to be drinking bottles of vodka daily, significant amounts of high-strength lagers, high-strength ciders, those sorts of things. So the prevalence of alcohol use in services and in the fells is high. But again, in terms of who gets support and what type of support is being accessed, a share of the 40% of people said that they were getting support with their alcohol, and that it was helpful. 23.9% said we'd still like more. Yes, we're getting support, but we'd like more. And 16%, just over 16%, would like help but weren't getting any. So again, very similar message to people accessing or trying to access mental health provision. People want support but feel like either not getting enough or aren't getting any at all. This presents quite a significant difficulty for us at the Fells and in other homeless services because the Fells is a dry site. Part of your licence agreement says you're not allowed to have alcohol or consume alcohol on site. The consequences of that, well, obviously we have rules. So if somebody drinks on site, it's a breach of the licence agreement, and actually could be asked to leave, which is kind of counterintuitive because we're trying to deliver a service to help people develop independent living skills. They drink to cope with some of the traumas and stress that comes from that present situation. And if they get caught drinking, they lose their accommodation, which probably makes them feel stressed and anxious. So what do people do when they're stressed and anxious? So we end up in this kind of cycle where we really struggle not to manage the situation because we manage the site well, but to manage the individual incidents when somebody's drinking on site. What do we do? So quite often it's about looking at why they were drinking, what are the current circumstances. We found one of the biggest triggers for incidents on site isn't the chronic stress and the continual stress that people carry. It's almost the episodic acute stress. Something happens, they think they're going to be recalled to prison. They don't get the benefits that they were hoping to get. They have a health assessment and they don't get the benefits. Their benefits are stopped. Those things create a spike in people's stress and they go off and either drink, use drugs or deal with it the way they deal with it, but normally in a positive way. Which kind of presents us with a real dilemma around care and control. We're trying to support people, we want to support people to move on independently, but we have to manage the situation. My observations, I've managed the service now for about 5 months. Staff vary in their approaches. Some are very authoritarian. Some are much more person-centered and think, right, what's going on for you right now and why have you done that? But there's a level of inconsistency that again creates tension on the site because we have some residents say, well, hang on a minute, I've been given a final warning. That person over there hasn't been sanctioned at all. That's not fair. And then we start to get disruption around relationships with key workers and those sorts of things. So what we've actually done, and I have to say a big thank you to Joe Cairns, one for inviting me to speak today, but Joe actually volunteers at the Fells. And really pleased, as I always am, to have a volunteer, but I was delighted when Joe told us that not only did she have an interest in health inequalities, but she also had a keen interest in participatory research, or peer-led research. So what we're doing at the moment is a piece of work led by Joe. I have absolutely no involvement, which is killing us, because I've got a background in peer research. But actually I'm the last person who needs to be involved in this piece of work. So having somebody who can work with the residents to carry out some research, Joe's actually ran a research group for 2 to 3 months now. We have a strong membership and we have 2 researchers, 2 residents who are now trained as researchers, who are asking the rest of the population in the service, what's your experience of alcohol on site? How is it managed? How has it made you feel? The important question is, what could be done differently? Because that's what I need to know. I need to know what do we do differently to keep people on site, to stop the evictions, to stop the unplanned move-ons. Because actually, for us, they're failures. If somebody leaves the service in an unplanned way, we've missed something. Some very early feedback. Alcohol is the same as drugs. Some people use it as a coping mechanism. So again, just that validation from residents that that, yeah, we are drinking. Started drinking before the legal age. I used to buy bottles. I feel restless and rock backwards and forwards from time to time. It's like you want to do something but you can't. The rule, no alcohol on site, is a safety mechanism for staff, and I wouldn't like it here if it was a wet hostel, if you could drink. Northerners are beer monsters. So clearly people want control. The difficulty is managing that control. And again, an example of a varied response from staff to incidents. And I guess going back to that question at the end of the last presentation about you can be a drinker and want to stop and advocate for not drinking. And I think we've already seen examples of that from the residents. I feel you can be a smoker and want to stop and advocate for not smoking, because actually overcoming any addiction is a real challenge. In terms of overcoming addiction, the thoughts of overcoming it and changing come before you achieve it. We're working with a fantastic group of residents who have an appetite not to use alcohol, but the personal circumstances and their addictions at the moment don't enable them to stop. What we're trying to do is harness their enthusiasm to change and use that to influence how we manage and deliver the service in the future. I'm going to leave it there because I am conscious of time. Do we have time for questions?